Shopify's point of sale system helps you sell at every stage of your business. Need a fast and secure way to take payments in person? We've got you covered. How about card readers you can rely on anywhere you sell?
Thanks. Have a good one.
Yep, that too. Want one place to manage all your online and in-person sales? That's kind of our thing. Wherever you sell, businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 a month trial at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.
When people are facing that loss or when they have a hard story, it's very, something about having my dad die has made me more aware or more thoughtful about the pain. And I didn't know if I should mention this, but your friend Jessica, Jason, was a powerful contributor to, you've already told, your remembrance of her is beautiful. And her, like, the research and the things that she did to draw things to your show or out of your many interests, was a special gift to us as listeners. And I didn't know her.
That's Joelle Brouner, a listener.
And I put flowers on his grave, and it was just such a journey for me. I got to go to the house, and the woman that owned the house let me in, where my father started his little business in the basement, and that basement was still unfinished. I wish I was hesitant. I wish I'd have taken pictures of it because it was just amazing, the open rafters and stuff in this little portion of a workshop. But anyway, I've said a lot of words here, but to circle back, what I recognized is that there's grief there that I've never been able to deal with, right? Because you're a little child and then you're told horrific things. I didn't know him, it's just, what do you do with that? What do you do with those feelings, And this speaks to my husband and to the person that he is, because when we made that trip, the backstory on that is by then all of our kids were out of the house and everything. And I was saying, we need to do a bucket list and we need to start traveling. Life is short.
That's Marie Holdridge, another listener. This is Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. This is the second part of our annual listeners episode. If you haven't had a chance to go listen to the first part, I suggest you do. I talk a little bit about some of our stats for the year and our enormous growth and some of the diversity of our audience. But the best part is really diving in with a large group of listeners to talk about their year, their future, the podcast. There's lots of joy in that episode and a lot of tears, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Today, we're going to have a continuation of that conversation with Joelle Brouner, a listener, and Marie, who was in the previous episode. Again, I hope you all enjoy it. I'll dive right in. Hey, Joelle, thank you for joining us. And I just wanted to ask you just a little bit about sort of your reflections on the year. Anything you liked or disliked about the podcast and what 2026 is going to look like for you?
Well, thank you. I think for me personally, this year has presented really good opportunities, but also some challenges. I think most people experience that during most years. I decided to change directions in my career. And so I have been working, I used to be a public administrator, and now I'm working on a Master of Divinity and pursuing chaplaincy. And so part of that work is looking at myself closely and figuring out how to be healthy and available the right way for that work. And also to identify how to serve. And so I've had a lot of ideas about that. And one of the needs that I see is potentially a true crime chaplain. I know
Oh,
that sounds maybe odd, but just privately and one-on-one, or however a family would like it, or a survivor of crime. Definitely in listening to this podcast's focus on missing and murdered Indigenous relatives and thinking about the intergenerational pain and the ways that people haven't been served by systems well. I'm not a system, but I certainly I feel like there could be ceremonies or celebrations or recognitions of who has been lost
yeah.
in certain forms, or what people have gained in community and in moving through the process of trying to find or negotiate losses that are not very visible. But I definitely am of the mind that something like that can't be projected onto a person or
Yeah.
community. And so one of the things that I really liked about the year were two examples that you have. And I wrote down some numbers of episodes. So Brian McGuire, the painter,
Oh, yeah.
painting the missing, murdered, and um also just the disenfranchised folks.
Right, because he also went to Juarez and Mexico and then the Irish jails.
And just a beautiful example that really spoke to me about how to be present to families and to let them choose. So I think that's a beautiful example that planted sort of a seed in my heart. Actually, that's where that idea kind of came from.
Oh, that's interesting. So, something I thought about the episode with Brian that really stuck out to me, and also the episode with Haley Omiso,
Which was
was
the next one I was
yeah,
gonna
right, yeah, was it. Both those episodes reminded me that just because there's a tremendous amount of suffering out in the world doesn't mean that you can't do something about it. And they've both, like, in completely different ways, advocated. But go on, sorry.
No, that's exactly right. I think I felt, I think the true crime space or whatever, I don't consider um the Silver Lining Handbook podcast a true crime podcast, but
I'm adjacent.
that the true crime space calls on us to think more about ethics. Or at least I'm hearing a lot more about the ethics of hearing people's stories and and that brings me to Raul, who you
Mhm.
just recently featured, the ethics of listening. And just, I mean, it's so funny to me how big-hearted, compassionate people sometimes try to reframe themselves. Um I I I heard him kind of not minimize himself, but
Oh, I think that's fair.
minimize the depth of his deep. I mean, wow, that's articulate. Depth and deep.
But he does have a deep well of empathy that probably deserves two adjectives.
Yeah, and genuine life-changing care. And what it means. He was talking about feeling like he met people after they were gone. And I have felt at certain points deeply moved in that way. There's something that I struggle with because I really do like listening to a lot of podcasts, and some of them aren't as principled. I still enjoy them, but I
Mhm.
don't want to see people suffering as entertainment.
Yeah.
And I don't want to feel invested in the way that someone is presented, you know, in a salacious way, or because in this podcast you have really featured and shown another element that I wanted to touch on, which is, I have to say that your coverage, or your episode with Billy Jensen
Mm.
was interesting to me for a lot of reasons. I haven't always felt successful. I've had the setbacks that come from choices I've made, and alcohol has been part of my adventure, and it was unceremonious in its it is a hurtful thing. And I think you're talking with him about shame, and the way that you've talked about shame throughout this podcast is always something that I come back to. And Billy I had listened to those other podcasts that he was part of, and I knew that part of his story, but I appreciated hearing this part.
Yeah.
And also, I'm a sucker for a redemption story.
Story. It's same here. Same here. I am a total sucker for a redemption story and second chances. But it's interesting you bring that up. That episode and some of if you want to look at the controversial side of the year, those episodes with Billy Jensen and Temujin Kensu with Jason Usry, they were probably the most polarizing episodes among listeners, where people either really, really love them or they really, really hated them. And I get the reasons for either, but I was reflecting recently on, like, why did um why did I focus on those things this year? And I think in Temujin's case, it for me, it's much more about the victim, Scott Macklem.
Yes.
And that if Scott's real killer, which we ultimately don't know, hasn't been found, that's an injustice. And I really am a big believer, as you guys can probably tell from the podcast. I'm going to get teary-eyed again. But as you can tell, that I really believe that an injustice anywhere is, an injustice everywhere.
Yes.
And then for Billy, it's about, I did not listen to any of his podcasts. I had only heard about his backstory. And another one of my guests had introduced us, and I got on the phone with him and just realized that, like, he accepted responsibility, that there were good lessons that we could learn from his journey that I think he's still very much on. And I really do believe in second chances. And I also believe in the idea that, like, when people fall, we can learn so much from them on their way back up.
Well, for sure. And the thing is just because I was interested in that episode doesn't totally mean I know how to feel about all of it. But the thing is, what I want more of in 2026 is capacity to listen and capacity to treat listening as a discipline, as an exercise, and not to I'm I'm quite talkative. So I'm always ready to, spring forth with some thought I have. Who cares? You know what I mean? Who really actually cares? Maybe if I listened for a while, it would be helpful. And maybe if we all learned a little bit more about listening, we don't have to decide right away if we like a story or don't like a story, or agree or don't agree. we can just consider the contours and see what it ends up meaning. Because I think hearing his story really helped me realize just how much shame I still have that I have not, I'm like, ooh, I want to put that in a closet corner and let's put some blankets on. While we're at it, let's clean that. I think shame is deep, deep water. So there's that. But I also, you mentioned Haley, her becoming a resource to the community in this scientific forensic way just was so incredibly my inner nerdy woman. I think, first of all, on that, that she would, but also from kind of a more sacred way, this weird way that at least you can't see me, but I'm a white person. So as a white person, kind of there's this way that Indigenous people are romanticized as, I don't know, keepers of ancient wisdoms and stuff, which is not meant to do harm, but does harm.
Yeah.
And also flattens the depth of experience. And I loved that she was a cutting edge scientist wanting to use the latest stuff. And it's yeah, you can talk about my traditional this or my ecological that, but you don't get to box me in.
Minimize me
Yeah,
to
that's
a great point.
How I'm going to be spiritual and how I'm going to recover my people.
Right.
And the recovery of the people is that sacred part, and how, and having someone there, she mentioned looking for actual friends, and I had to turn off the podcast.
It's hard. It's hard. I think she had, what was it, 10 or more classmates that disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Or ended up dead. 2 of whom were Ashley and Leo Wagner, and Leo actually was one of the searchers for Ashley.
Yeah, it that just really there's an experience of loss in that is so much deeper than most people probably have to face. I'm interested in disability communities. I'm deeply interested in disability communities, and I'm part of I have disabilities. And I think in some ways, when I listened to that, what I was connecting to was that, because so many. Okay, cerebral palsy and talking on a podcast. Let's try it together. Palsy and podcast. Let's see how it goes. Because so many people with disabilities die young and are unknown. And often, particularly the people who are not verbal, who don't have verbal skills, even if they use assistive augmentative communication devices, people, including this person, haven't always taken the time to center their voices.
Yeah.
So in a year when, and I'm certainly not trying to be partisan, but there's huge changes in the healthcare landscape that are going to result in a lot of people dying and not being counted, because what will happen is people will say, oh, they had disabilities anyway, or whatever, they were sick anyway, and that's why they died. And that won't be true. And I won't know how to find them. And there won't be any data.
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking about. But it's not to conflate our experiences at all, because there's something different, even if you know someone who died, than actually knowing someone and then seeing their human remains. And so, please.
But I think there is like a thread, Joel, between all these things, and it goes back to that idea of suffering. It doesn't really matter. You know, I just remember a number of times in my life where people have tried to compare pain. Like, this person went through this, and this isn't as bad that this thing I'm going through. And I always remind people, like, when that child loses their toy and they're screaming and their world is ending, or that teenager who has their first breakup, or whatever it is, pain is pain. And it is the same for, you know, whatever circumstance somebody's walking through. So, you know, when people get upset about some of the things that are either happening in their lives or in the world, I just try not to compare pain, because you just don't know.
I think that's right. And I think one of the things that I value so much about this podcast, and you have shared, you know, very deeply, your love for your mom and the pain and the grief of her passing. And my dad, he died, and it was really hard because he had Alzheimer's. So he was such a cool person. But when you talk about your mom, and then you invite like the Harringtons and the Thomas sisters, those Thomas sisters for Dion Thomas, you know, those were episodes that were so rich, because I do think it is so hard for people to get out of coercive control. Coercive control can do just such a number on people. And the love they had for their sister, and the vibrancy, and the regular, like the way they talked about, well, you know, I was at a basketball game where I was just taking care of this or that. And then I had to like go and investigate and become like this, you know, Johnny on the spot investigator person, because there was no resource. I was like,
no one to do it. There really was.
I can't. That just was very humbling, like truly humbling, to have grief and knowing that grief would be like right in the front, but you have to push through that to suddenly become an investigator. And then in the Harringtons, I'm a Metallica fan, so I knew that Morgan had gone to a Metallica show, but her parents were beautiful, and their commitment to their marriage, to being married, and to really doing justice to their grief, but also to moving forward.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting about them, and I would also put Karen Watson and her sister, Kristen Means, who were Dion's sisters, in the same bucket. And then, Maria, I hate to like throw this one back to you, because I'll put you in the same bucket too. That there are these people, like if I ran into Jill or Dan on the street in front of me, or I ran into Dion's sisters, there are these people who seem so healthy and happy, who have gone through, you know, you talked about your mom, really hard to imagine suffering, like things I cannot fathom.
Yeah.
Right? But you're so healthy, and you so bring such positive things into the world. And it's not to say that you guys don't struggle, or the Harringtons don't struggle, or other people don't struggle. It's a real inspiration for me. And, you know, Joelle, when I think about what you're saying, the podcast being an inspiration, I feel like the guests and the listeners are really inspirations for me, because when I hear your stories, sometimes I sit back and I think, wow, okay, if they can, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, the quality of the conversation is the thing that keeps me coming back to the podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know about you, Marie, but one of my experiences is like when you're meeting someone and you're introducing and you're maybe talking about with them about like the hardest days of their lives or something. You sound so confident and kind of unafraid. You know, you meet them where they're at in this way that is like, and you're sharing this with me and you don't have to. And I'm, thank you for that. And I'm always like, you know, I don't want to be like somebody's trauma vulture or like Insta friend when they have a tragedy, because then that makes it about me. There's just a lot of questions. And obviously, your background or your experience in the mental health sphere might help you have those skills. I don't know. Maybe that's just who you are.
Yeah, it might be that.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
an instructive example of they already know what their feeling is. All you're doing is acknowledging. We can do that. Like,
Yeah, everyone can do it. Like, if you think about it, I'll tell people it's really more about me facilitating your opportunity to tell your story. But we can all do that for people. I mean, what we
Absolutely.
call it, right? And Marie, you get this too. We call it things like creating a safe space for someone or other things along those lines. But it's really, and it reminds me of some of what you were saying in the Marie in the beginning about the chats and the groups and the back and forth, and then like me always coming in as the peacemaker. How do we create a safe space for people to talk about how they really feel? How do we create an environment where, it's safe enough for them to actually think about what they feel?
Right.
yeah, I think also I'm going to try to use the word community less, because I'm thinking the word community is bandied about when there isn't community there. Like the term online community. Sometimes some spaces are an actual community and sometimes they are not.
Yeah.
And I keep wanting a way that I don't think exists for kind of a grander scale of change, a shift. But cultural shifts don't happen in that way. And I think, I hope not, but it's like going to be a one at a time thing. I'm not good enough for one at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't a social worker because I thought it would kill my heart. I mean, I thought, oh no, that will be very hurtful, but I'll do the systemic work, right? And then I did some systemic work, and I'm like, this is BS.
Yeah.
Marie, were you gonna?
Yeah. So I wanted to, if I could interject something, when you started off talking, Joelle, and you mentioned about working with people that, from a ministry perspective related to true crime and stuff. I've been on a journey since I think it was 2018. I had mentioned earlier in the discussion, my father was murdered when I was 3 years old, and I have no active memory of him at all. I can't even pull up one thing at all. And I have pain in my heart for that. The high level story. He was my mother had abandoned us, and my father had moved to Montana to try to make a life for himself and then provide care for my sister and myself. And he was murdered by an extended family member. And that all, went to court or whatever. But I was a very, very young child when he was killed. And then through the course of events, my sister and I were placed back with my birth mother, and the home was incredibly dysfunctional. But a component of it was that she's a pathological liar and just made the most horrific statements about my father. And I look like him, and so I was the brunt of that as well. Anyway, so I'd never been to my father's grave. I was on a journey to learn about him. And so I think it was 2018, my husband took me to Missoula, Montana. And we went to the courthouse, and I mean, the whole journey was amazing. But I got the court records because my mother had made some allegations of some horrific misconduct on my father's part that allegedly justified his murder. And so what I did when I got the court records, I could see clearly that was not the case. And so that gave me some peace about it. And then I was able to go to his grave and put flowers on his grave. No one had been back to his grave since the time he was buried because the family wasn't from there. And no one had been back. And I put flowers on his grave. And it was just such a journey for me. I got to go to the house, and the woman that owned the house let me in, where my father started his little business in the basement, and that basement was still unfinished. I wish I was hesitant. I wish I'd have taken pictures of it because it was just amazing, the open rafters and stuff in this little portion of a workshop. But anyway, I've said a lot of words here, but to circle back, what I recognized is that there's grief there that I've never been able to deal with, right? Because you're a little child and then you're told horrific things. I didn't know him, it's just, what do you do with that? What do you do with those feelings, And this speaks to my husband and to the person that he is, because when we made that trip, the backstory on that is by then all of our kids were out of the house and everything. And I was saying, we need to do a bucket list and we need to start traveling. Life is short. We need to do things. We need to go places. And so I said to him, where do you want to go? Where would you like to go? We just need to start planning trips. And he looked at me and said, Marie, I want to take you to see your father's grave. I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And I have pictures now of that,
The
Anyway.
privilege that it was to hear your story just then, but also I remember you sharing a bit of it before on a previous year, and the depth of that. And I feel like there's something about child grief or child experience where, because of the way that we think when we're small is different,
Yes.
and maybe
Yes.
things are happening that we don't have language for. And then if you add, the experiences of trauma, and even if your mom, I just call people that behave like that tough customers because I don't know what else I can call them, but certainly can see why that would be very, very hard. And yet that was the mom that you had. We want, going back to wanting everything to be tied up neatly. People's lives aren't tied up neatly.
No, they're not.
That's not the way that life is. And
Right.
what I like about this podcast is that it doesn't try to make it that way. It doesn't. I mean,
no sugarcoating, right?
I mean, I don't presume to. One of the things is, even though I have a faith, I'm not suggesting anybody else has to have that faith. I really want, there's even, there's a growing movement for spiritual care for people that are atheists or agnostics. I mean, People just kind of need connection in general. And so,
And I think even if you are atheist or agnostic, we all have to agree that there's things that we don't understand. There are things that are greater than us. You have to be naive to believe that part. And you guys talking about that, like your mom Marie, and you talking about the tough customers, reminded me of a conversation I had a few days ago with a woman I know who was dealing with very difficult interfamily. To call it drama is a stretch, but I would say abuse. And, one of the things when you're in Al-Anon that they teach you this phrase that the person did the best they can with what they had. And it doesn't mean that you should accept abuse, but you have to accept sometimes that people in your lives, they're doing the best they can. Like maybe their version of love is not what you would consider love, but it's what they've got.
yeah, I have a really hard time. I maybe I have more work to do, but I just don't agree that people do the best they can. Sometimes I feel like they say they're doing the best they can, and they're doing as much as they want to at that time. And
I think the underlying premise behind kind of like that phrase is that whether it's by choice or it's not by choice, that's the best they have to offer.
okay,
There you go. There
I
you
got that.
go.
See, I can hear that. That's a different.
Right.
That feels a little different.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Right. I mean, quite a few years ago, I read for me, a very helpful book about borderline personality disorder, which I believe my mother has, untreated, never been treated at all. And the author of that book, the book is called Stop Walking on Eggshells.
Eggshells. Oh.
Yes, and she mentions in there, and it was healing for me to read that because she said the cruel things that they do to others is not about you at all. It's all within them. And so, as a child, when you are emotionally abused and told horrific things and treated, so horribly, you internalize it and you take it in. And so for me to hear that and to understand that it really wasn't about me, she doesn't care about me, it's so toxic. I've distanced myself from that relationship because it is so toxic. But it was helpful and healing to me to hear that or to understand that it's really not about you. It's where they are. And so that circles back to what you were saying, Jason, because, because of her problem or her pathology, she's not capable, right, of
Right.
doing anything more. And
that
so you
is
got to
the
let that
point.
go as her child and just say, it is what it is,
Yeah. And I think that's another great point too. A lot of the hurt people deliver and it goes back almost to that conversation we were saying that when people fight online, they're not really fighting with you. They're fighting with this avatar that they've
Yes.
created. A
What they
lot
believe.
of, yep. I think a lot of the anger in the world is really about what's going on inside.
Yeah, I think that's right. And earlier when I was when emotion was surfacing about my dad, without going into a big long story, at the end of his life, um his wife had him cremated, and my sister and I weren't able to weren't part of the decision making there to
Oh.
to um like put him to rest. And so I think actually that some of my feelings around him, like my desire to help people that might have some ambiguity in their loss, might go back to that feeling of like, you were saying that it was significant for you to go to your dad's grave. And
Mhm.
I'm so glad that you got that chance. And just something I know about my dad anyway is that he wouldn't be attached to a place that his body was, at the end of his life. But I was surprised because there's something about the death of a parent that's kind of different than other deaths in my experience, and just the things that it makes you think about. I started thinking, wow, everybody out there is a child of somebody, and they had two parents at one time. And when people are facing that loss, or when they have a hard story, something about having my dad die has made me more aware, or more thoughtful about the pain. And I didn't know if I should mention this, but your friend Jessica, Jason, was a powerful contributor to, you've already told, your remembrance of her is beautiful.
Mhm.
And her, like, the research and the things that she did to draw things to your show or out of your many interests, was a special gift to us as listeners. And I didn't know her, but I think she was part of the year that
Yes,
I remember.
for sure.
Absolutely.
And
She did good.
and the podcast.
Yeah.
So when I think about what was 2025 was pretty real.
Oh, yeah.
That's a way to put it.
One way.
Yes.
But also, I feel like where we're at as a world is sort of making me feel anyway, like being the shallow niceties, just the flippant, offhanded, everybody likes a little snark now and then. But I'm gonna work at not having that at anyone's expense. I don't know what people are going through when they read my little online comment.
Right.
I mean, I want, what I want in 2026 is those kind of conversations.
So I want to read you something, and this is kind of funny. So I put it up on September 20th. So this is before Jessica died, but it comes from something Jessica said to me, and I pinned it to the top of my Twitter account. And it's been a big reminder for me. Please keep my heart softened in a world that wants it to be hardened, my words gentle in a world that wants them to be harsh, and my arms open in a world that wants them to be clenched. This is my prayer. And I really want to live by that in the next year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think anything could say it better.
Well, thank Jess.
That's a lovely quote. You need to get that back over on your Facebook side, because I don't have that. I don't do Twitter, or X, or whatever you call it.
I'll put it up today.
All right, Jason, please do. I mean,
I think that the people that are on the Facebook webpage, on the Facebook page for this pod, are good people.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
I don't really, I don't go as often as maybe I should, but I'm interested in the people that are drawn to this podcast, because the people that are drawn to this podcast are drawn to conversations, and each one has a story, and it's just a privilege to.
Yeah. I don't think people get here by accident. That's what I've sort of figured out, that, I was having a conversation with some of the podcasters who have like a lot of crossover with my listeners. And someone said, it's no mistake which ones go over to your podcast. It's no, like, you can pick them out.
Yeah. Yeah, well, back in the day when there was all that battle going on, there were a couple of individuals that kind of reached out to me on the side, and it was Jennifer Harobin and
Mhm.
Elizabeth, right?
Yeah.
And so they invited me over to some other areas where it was kinder and gentler, and it was like a breath of fresh
You're
air.
like,
Or
what's going on over here?
yes, I
Right.
know. Yeah, or how you mention it, Jason, about it being a palate cleanser to be in, because the
Yep.
true crime community kind of attracts one crowd. And like what you were saying, I think earlier, Joelle, that it's the scandalous stuff that gets all the press, right?
The
And so
attention.
the ones that are more out there and maybe not as ethical, they're the ones that get all the clicks, right?
Yeah.
The clickbait. Where the ones of substance, such as Jason's podcast, I don't know if you listen to Murder Sheet, but like
Yeah,
Anya
that's
and
me.
Kevin, Alice and Brett, and Julia Callie. I mean, y'all are top tier along with,
That's the breakup of
yes,
Breakup.
yes,
I went
yes,
to
Gilbert
CrimeCon.
King. Those
I
are my
went to
go-tos.
CrimeCon this year because it came to my town, and that's where I met you, Jason. Um, but I found CrimeCon to be so overwhelming, so profoundly overwhelming. Uh, It was
Are
like
you
going.
more, Joelle, I don't mean to interrupt, but are you more introverted? Is it the crowd or was it just everything there?
I don't know, but it was like
Okay.
going to True Crime Chuck E. Cheese, and I just thought, oh,
I'm with you.
this is too much, and I think, no shade on anyone there. There were people that really cared, and I mean a lot of people, but I think that there is a commitment to victims in that space that I think is excellent, but
Yes.
it's still there's something about it that I hope why did I mention this? Just that it could be it's just really big. And if you're not in a big I can't imagine being a family and going to that space.
Well, again, Jason, I love that you do these listener episodes where we get to come on and talk, and it doesn't matter if we have the horrible Texas accent or, whatever, that you're just so kind and generous, with your time and the connections I think that we get to make through these episodes as well as just within the community that you have. I really appreciate your perspective. That's pretty much sums it up for me.
I'm super excited to meet you today, Marie.
Thank you.
Um
Likewise.
I think your story is a powerful and moving story, and your process and commitment to it really I am happy for you that you had the experience of being able to look at that record of what your dad said without it being mediated by I mean, it was mediated by a legal process, but you had a chance to get closer to how he represented his thoughts, and I think that's powerful. So,
Yeah.
I'm honored to hear that and to be with you. And, you know, Jason, I I love your podcast. I think the heart that you bring to it,
Mm-hmm.
conversations that you support and allow to unfurl the plant little seeds are really positive. Um and I also think that a couple little episodes I just wanted to also mention. There was one episode um about how sexual abuse has happened in Protestant denominations, and I think that's really important, and also something about spiritual abuse. I think it's because it may be because of what I'm studying, but what I'm interested in is what somebody would think of healing. I mean, what does healing mean is my question.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a very long time, as someone who moved in disability communities, you know, didn't want to talk about healing because I mistook it for curing. And curing is erasure. I don't want to give up what I've learned from my experience. I think that healing is a big undertaking, and so I appreciated those being shared. And I just have gratitude for really, I want to say, your missing and murdered relatives content. I'm not a tribally affiliated person. I don't have, any. I just appreciate that those stories continue to come, and I continue to think, Monty, the dad from Minnesota who's a first responder. I still think about him and his daughter. I think her name was Nada. And I think about the incredible grace, profound grace of Ashley Loring, Heavy Runner's sister. And really just there's just a lot of power in it. I mean, Julia Cowley and Brett and Alice. I mean, even though those are legal issues or places where people are using their professional discipline, when you listen to them and just Marie, I don't think your Southern accent is bad. I don't think that Brett's is bad either, but his is more than yours. He's Alabama, so you're not gonna. But I think that they bring their heart. Their heart
Yes.
shows in the work they want to do, and similarly with the Delphi focus that Anya and Kevin Sheet brought in their book Shadow of the Bridge, and how they
Yes.
covered it. Those are just the deeper stories, and the ones that I don't know what I think about too, like Mr. Jensen. Well, I wish him well. Like on a different day, I could have that story. So
Yeah.
maybe not that exact one, but
Yeah. So, Joelle, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you touched on something. And, I think that, Jason, what makes your podcast so good is, and I'm not fangirling or whatever they call that, but the fact that it's your heart. It's the heart that you put into it, and it's evidenced by what you bring and the people that you connect with and then bring forward. And like Joelle was saying earlier, or maybe it was you, a lot of us don't have space to touch a lot of people, even at one time or even, along the way. But if you touch and make a difference in even one person's life, then you've done something, right? When I used to teach a Bible class at church, I used to tell this because, when you teach a class and you're in a church and, people kind of lift you up or whatever. And, I told them, I said, the Lord gave me the ability to speak and I do okay with that. But I said, there are other ways to serve and they're equally valuable and maybe sometimes more valuable. And I told the story about a family and I don't remember the particulars, but I'll just paraphrase. There was a death in the family and there was a large number of children and people in the home, and they were preparing for this funeral. And a man came there with this shoe shine kit, and he went and pulled their shoes out of the closet and shined everybody's shoes to get ready for the funeral. And he wasn't a preacher, he wasn't a teacher, he was just a guy with a shoe shine kit. And he did that, and that's a ministry, and that made an impact, a beautiful impact on that family, an act of service that the world would just blow by. But, to me, that's kind of what Christ would have done,
I wanted to thank you both for joining. Before I go, I want to answer some questions from some listeners who wrote them in. The first one, Jason, what episode from this past year was your favorite and why? That's easy. It's a tie. First, the interview with Jill and Dan Harrington, Morgan Dana Harrington's parents. Morgan was killed in 2000 9 outside of the John Paul Jones Arena at the University of Virginia when she was abducted by a man we would later find out was a serial killer. And then the second one is my interview with Ashley Loring Heavy Runner's sister, Kimberly Loring. What both of those episodes really share in common is the level of grace that Dan, Joe, and Kimberly showed. There's one moment in the episode one of the episodes with Morgan's parents where Jill says that she was looking out at another family and their child was either going to prom or graduating or something along those lines. And she looked on her mantle and she thought to herself, all I have are these ashes. And then she paused and she thought, when you have ashes and you have water, you can make clay. And when you make clay, you can build. And Dan and Jill have done that. Morgan wanted to be a teacher, and they've created a school in Zambia, programs in Virginia and across the United States that will have impacted more people than Morgan could have as a teacher in her lifetime. And that was very profound for me, that two people who were going through such suffering were able to turn it into something so powerful and good. And then for Kimberly, it was her grace and her forgiveness. Kimberly said that she just wanted her sister back, but she also said that she had forgiven the people who had harmed her sister, that ultimately there will be no justice and that them going to prison doesn't necessarily help it. And that level of forgiveness and that ability to forgive the people who are withholding information about where your baby sister is was just profoundly powerful and made me really think about, the grudges that I hold or the anger or frustration that I have. So, Kimberly, Dan, and Joe were real great examples for me and role models for me this year. Next question. What's been the most interesting guest or topic you've had on the podcast? So that goes all the way back to the beginning. And I don't even know where to start on this one. I think one of my earliest guests and guest from 2024, Jerry Colonna, always pulls at my soul. He is an executive coach and a podcast host himself, and he has this ability to get underneath the surface. So I feel like I'm coming out of 100 therapy sessions in the best way when I talk to him. I feel like talking to him also allows me to be vulnerable in a way that I, may not always have the easiest time doing. So those are two episodes I would recommend to anyone. I think the episodes with John Mitchell on belonging and well-being have been really powerful. Gilbert King, the 4 episodes we've done, first on Leo Schofield and injustice in the Florida Panhandle during the Jim Crow era. And then finally, the episodes this year on Jeremy Scott, who admitted to killing Leo Schofield's wife, Michelle. Leo was released recently. I just find Gilbert to be such a thoughtful guest, and the subject matter he chooses to explore is really, really important, and it's core to justice and injustice. Brett and Alice from the prosecutors, always love having them on, but particularly Brett for the October episodes, and this year's October episodes are particularly powerful. We looked at the monsters that we make in society and life, and Brett had this one line that was, the real monsters come out when we don't pay attention to the lessons from the fake monsters. And I think that was profound. And it was also nice to wrap Delphi, a coda to Delphi with Brett this year. The Laura Mead episode with the teacher was powerful for me. My mom had died less than a year before that. And one of my friends from the group had suggested that it was time for me to do an episode of the teacher. And that was powerful. And then also Chris Suse, the ghost hunter, came on a little bit after that. And we had an awesome conversation about how the most common ghost story had to do with love. And that's sort of how I feel like my mom touches me. So all those episodes, I know I didn't give you one, but there's a bunch. So the next question, do you think tunnel vision and other cognitive biases are a problem in investigations and reporting? And then they go on to ask, have you ever experienced it in researching an event or a case? Or do you think you would even know if you were experiencing it? How do investigators and researchers realize how it's happening, and what do they do about it? Well, I think, do we experience it? We really do. And like there are moments where it can be really, really helpful. If you think of the early stages of criminal investigation, recency bias, which is the bias where we have a tendency to give disproportionate weight to recent events or information compared to older evidence, it can be really helpful in the first weeks of an investigation. Same thing with reporting. But over time, it can really, 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 really harm perspective. And I think that gets in the way of true crime. We're looking at the most recent events and not the totality of the events often. Also, confirmation bias. Reporters and investigators tend to interpret evidence that supports their initial hypothesis while ignoring contradictory evidence. This is what causes tunnel vision. And I think you need to weigh contradictory evidence and see if it changes your conclusions. I also think like hindsight bias is a big part of it. We look at incidents and outcomes seem obvious in retrospect, but that often lets us oversimplify things and fit it into a nice narrative. Anchoring bias is another one. Early information or some presumptions can also disproportionately influence an investigation. A witness statement may anchor the direction of an inquiry. We have a hard time jumping off of that. It's always good, I think, in reporting and investigating, you go down all the rabbit holes, not just like getting locked into one. And that's a big tip off for me when I see somebody pursuing just one rabbit hole. And then, overconfidence, groupthink, social biases all come in. And yes, I do think people can recognize when they're going in it. I mean, at least for me, I feel angst when I feel like I'm ignoring a piece of evidence or, escalation of commitment heuristic has happened and I've invested in a certain theory and I'm having a harder time letting go of it. And, you listen to that angst. And you also have to approach these things with a blank slate, with no assumptions, pulling back, or not no assumptions, but pulling back some of your assumptions and looking at what the data says. We do this in psychological testing often. We say, trust the assessment. Put aside what you think about people and trust the assessment. And what I found is when I assess people, I'll interpret the results often. I'll be like, oh, this isn't true. And then I'll get in to debrief the person or have the conversation with them and realize, in fact, this is true. So trust the data and listen to those voices that are telling you about contradictions. Next question. If you were shown evidence that contradicted what you had already previously reported or believed, and that you had presented on your show, should you then present evidence or information to your audience? The answer to that part of the question is yes. Or do you think you should decide what facts and evidence shape their opinion of that topic? I mean, I think in looking at it, truly, if we put something on the show and ultimately ends up not being true, it's worth highlighting it. And, the person also asked, how do you make the decision as to what to leave out or what not to report? And I think the big thing, an interview-based podcast is really interesting because I'm facilitating other people's stories. So rarely do I remove anything. There have been a couple of instances where I've removed things that I just thought were wantonly wild speculation, but it's been rare. I think there have been 3 clips of things that I've moved out. I do believe in giving people a chance to sort of share their stories. And as you can see with LaDonna Humphrey, who, after I interviewed her, ended up sort of connected to a very large scandal. You know, we rewrote the top of that episode to point out some of the issues that have been raised. Also had an interview with Julie Murray, who's Maureen Murray's sister, where we, in a bonus episode, address some of the related concerns. I think you can also see it in my interviews with Jason Osprey, who came on to talk about Temujin Kensu. At that point, I had new information about Temujin's behavior that I didn't have the year before when I interviewed his wife, Paula. And I wanted to press Jason on it. And I think he did an excellent job of discussing it. Not that we have all the answers to that. And I try to keep an open mind in cases uh, until I really, really, really dive deep into the evidence. I was never partial to a suspect in the John Benet Ramsey case, but certainly identified some that made little sense for me, for example. And as much as I wanted to ID a suspect in my mind in the Delphi murders or the Piketon murders, I really couldn't come to a conclusion until I saw a lot of the evidence. And so I think it's really important to sort of push aside some of your evidence. I got another question about, do I think tunnel vision and cognitive biases are a problem? And of course, yes. I mean, I can think of some for me where it was particularly relevant. West Memphis 3, until Brett and Alice from the prosecutors did their series. I think I overestimated how much I knew about the case and came to the opposite conclusion of the one that I had before. The murder of Martha Moxley is an oldie but a goodie. That's one from the 1970s. In the early 2000s, I started researching this case after a friend of mine wrote a book on it. And I ultimately came to the opposite conclusion that my friend, who the author was, and did not believe that Michael Skakel was responsible for Martha's death. So it definitely comes up. Got another question. You've discussed wrongful convictions on your show. How do you think they happen? What are signs an investigation is headed in that direction? And do you think it's possible to see it in motion and headed toward the wrong person? And the person also asked whether I would call it out if I saw it happening. The answer is yes, I would call it out. And yes, I do think you can see them happening. Not always, right? And that's part of the reason why they're happening. I think the first thing you have to think about is that it goes back to this idea of heuristics. You have to consider the type of people that get wrongfully convicted. Rarely are they choir boys, or if they are choir boys, like Pablo Velez Jr., some family member or friend or someone associated with them is not a choir boy. And I think they often fit into narratives that other people have and some of those cognitive bias traps that we fall into. So, yeah, those are my general thoughts on that one. Next question. Do you think a crime going unsolved is better than a wrongful conviction, even if the wrongful conviction brings relief to the victims' families? Why or why not? Well, I think that's an easy one for me. I want victims to find peace, but I also want justice for anyone who ends up stuck in the criminal justice system, whether justice is acquittal, justice is conviction. So what binds all these things together is truth, meaning the truth is what will bring justice for everyone, and the truth is what will bring the greatest amount of potential peace for everyone. Ultimately, a wrongful conviction may leave someone with the impression that something's been resolved, but it really hasn't. All it's done is transferred their suffering onto another person. Got one final question. Someone asked, Jason, what could we give you for Christmas? If you want to give me something for Christmas, here's what it is. Give somebody who is in need, somebody who's hurting, somebody who's struggling with something, the gift of your time. Alternatively, you can donate to a cause that really matters. For Jessica Olive Cash, who died this year, we did a donation for transgender rights. I've been encouraging people to donate to a GoFundMe for Hannah Tibbetts, who's struggling with breast cancer. There are a lot of Native American causes, particularly around missing and murdered Indigenous people. So if you want to give me a Christmas gift, donate to one of those causes or donate some of your time to someone who is in need. So that's a wrap. See you guys soon. If you'd like to join me and other listeners for more and deeper conversations, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with me and other listeners, you can join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you guys all again next week.